Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. Welcome from beautiful, sunny Toronto to today's webinar, Digital Identity in the Era of Cloud-Based Biometrics. And that's quite a title, and you are going to receive a lot of information today, so buckle up, it could get bumpy. My name is Peter O'Neill, and I am the president of FindBiometrics and Mobile ID World. And what a year for biometrics. More than ever, we are being told that education is critical for our industry, education for end users in all of the very broad vertical markets that are seeing a biometric explosion. From fintech and healthcare to blockchain and IoT, from law enforcement and border control to enterprise and automotive, just to reference a few. Not to mention the incredible cost and absolute user frustration with passwords. We like to say at FindBiometrics that we are entering into the era of naked payments. No more passwords, tokens, or fobs. Just you and your biometrics. Naked payments, very cool. And by the way, this is already all happening right now. Now, we have a very special webinar for you today. This is the very first discussion ever focused purely on this topic of cloud-based biometrics. At every conference where I moderate the biometric discussions, questions about in the cloud versus on device come up. And we do our very best to answer in the short time that we are given at these conferences. Today, however, we have gathered the leading global experts in this area to spend the whole webinar taking a deep dive into this very important topic. And more than ever, we need to hear from you about what is important and challenging in our industry. So please visit FindBiometrics after our webinar and take 4 minutes to complete our Easy Year in Review survey. You can do it all right there on the front page of our site. And this is our 15th year for the Year in Review survey, and we want your opinions especially now. And you'll learn a lot just by taking the survey, and all those who complete it will receive first look at the results. And on January 24th, we'll be holding a webinar with Leidos to discuss the results with an expert biometric panel. You will not want to miss that one. With so much going on, be sure to stay on top of all the breaking news by visiting FindBiometrics and our sister site, Mobile ID World. We're now in our 16th year, and we cover the markets like no one else with in-depth articles, insights, the largest yearly review of our industry, featured theme months, newsletters, interviews with the leaders in this space, international speaking engagements, and of course, our now famous webinar series. Next up for us is the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona in February. And if any attendees today are planning on going, please reach out to me so we can meet. Biometrics are everywhere at this monster show. Now, we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to jump right in. Please note, if you'd like to ask a question, just type it into the dialog box in the go-to control panel on the right side of your screens. And please do this at any time. Don't wait until the end, as this will give us an opportunity to manage your questions, and we'll do our absolute best to answer as many possible at the end. And given the number of attendees today, there will be lots of questions on this topic. This webinar will last about 50 minutes in total and will be recorded and available at findbiometrics.com. I would now like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for their continuing support, ImageWare and BioConnect, and a special thanks to Acuity Market Intelligence. And to start off our discussions today, I am delighted that Maxine Most is providing her latest research on this topic. Max is the principal of Acuity Market Intelligence and is the top analyst in our industry. I have known Max well for 15 years. and she has the ability to see things well into the future and accurately predict where our industry is heading, what the opportunities are, and where the challenges lay. And to assist in our deep dive today, I have asked Max to spend a little more time laying out the groundwork for today's discussions, as this is indeed a very hot topic in our industry. I am so pleased to introduce the mighty Maxine Most.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thanks to everybody who's joined in today. As Peter said, Acuity has been looking at this market for, I guess, 16, 17, almost 17 years now, and we really focus exclusively on biometrics market intelligence and connected technology and market developments that are either influenced by or influenced biometric market development. So if you don't know about Acuity, feel free to visit our website. We do business with a lot of great companies in this space, and we're happy to be moving through this really exciting time in the industry. So as Peter said, people talk about biometrics in the cloud, and it comes up in passing, and it seems to me we never really have enough time to focus on it. So I'm really glad that we can do that today. And just briefly, so everybody's on the same page, when we're talking about biometrics in the cloud, what we're really talking about, excuse me, is server-side biometrics or centralized storage and authentication of biometric data. And there's a lot of interesting commentary about what that means. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. But fundamentally, there's two ways that this can be done, thinking about it in the mobile realm, and it really is an evolution sort of the traditional biometric reader market over the past decade or so, which is that the biometric data is captured locally on a device, it's converted to a template on the device, the template's encrypted, and then it's sent to a server for comparison with the previously captured template, or the biometric data is captured locally on the device, the data is encrypted, and then the actual image data is sent to a centralized location for template generation and comparison. So that's what we're talking about today. And what I think is interesting about it is there's a lot of mythology, and we're going to address some of that. And these are just some basic diagrams. When we talk about biometric authentication, we've heard a lot over the past 4 years about on-device authentication. And the FIDO Alliance in particular has done a great job in promoting biometrics as a alternative to passwords on mobile devices. And what we see in that model is that the data, all the biometric data, lives on the device. And the only thing that's getting that's moving out beyond the device is a request for a specific type of transaction and some kind of identification that links you back to the device. But the authentication itself is all device based. And what I'm talking about today, and what I think is really important, is the evolution of a companion model of biometric authentication, which is that the authentication is actually happening in the cloud. And I think the most important thing to consider when you're thinking about this, because a lot of people think, oh, it's only going to be on the device because it's the only way it's safe and I have to control my biometrics. And in truth, I think we need to think about the global application of biometrics and what that means in terms of digital identity. And I think of it in terms of this model, biometric identity service provider model. Some people talk about it as biometric as a service model. But the notion is that there's a location, there's a third-party entity in many cases that manages that data independently, and that the security that people are looking for and the anonymity that people are looking for is not restricted to a model where it only happens on the device. That can be accomplished through a biometric identity service provider model where the only business that organization is in is biometric data capture, management, storage, and security. And so it's a bit of a different model because the biometrics go to that BISIP, and that's where the authentication is done. And then the party that wants to address the risk and wants to consider the authentication gets information from two different entities in evaluating a particular transaction or request. And another, excuse me, another version of that would be to embed that BISP model within the organization itself. This is another approach. I think there's some limitations here because I think there's value in separating out the PII that organization would hold from the biometric data, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go further. So, what's driving all of this market, obviously, is the proliferation of smart devices. We're looking at a generation of digital credentials. Biometrics are clearly mainstream. You can see this chart on the right, which is Acuity forecast, which just shows the sheer number of biometric-enabled devices that are available today and that are going to be available over the next few years, right? And so what's happened is because we have that platform, and people have embraced that platform, we have widespread consumer acceptance, we're seeing adoption of applications and solutions that incorporate biometrics. And to date, the vast majority of that has been based on the device. And there's been a lot of market education around the value of doing device-based biometrics. And I think there is value there. My argument is that there's an appropriate time and place or appropriate place to store your biometrics, if you will, for specific types of applications. And in many cases, that is on the device. In many other cases, it's not. So as we focus on customer experience and we look at a marketplace where there's massive data breaches and financial fraud, we're also looking at compelling changes in the way we even think about IT infrastructure and automation, given the emergence of artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks. Now, some people will say those things are not all the same. Some people will lump them together, but essentially we've got much more intelligent machines and processing that are impacting the way we look at IT and the way we build solutions. And then finally, blockchain, which I think is sort of an all-encompassing term, which to me really reflects the limitations of the relational database model. And so all of these things right now are converging in a way and exploding in another way to fundamentally change the dynamics of the way we think about IT security and the way we think about digital identity. For those of you that don't know, I recently put out a paper which is entitled Taming the Authentication Beast, and it talks about cloud computing relative to financial services. And I like this concept of, quote, the authentication beast, because it relates to all of the issues we're having right now within the IT realm. And what's interesting to me about this is that there are fundamental challenges that are being that exist today based on the way we've done authentication and the way we're looking to do it in the future. And one of them that is critically important to me, and I think that I think about this in a slightly different way than most people, which is I don't think we want to eliminate all friction. Excuse me. I think we want to eliminate unnecessary friction. If I'm getting on the metro in Paris or the tube in London and I want to use my smartphone, I don't want any friction. If I'm doing a wire transfer to my good friend Peter O'Neill for $15,000, I want some friction. I want to know that I want some feedback, if you will. So I think this is important to think about what's the level of security that we want at an appropriate level of friction. Obviously, the user experience is incredibly important. And what's happened with mobile is the expectations for users of the experience and the level of engagement is much higher than I think we're actually meeting as an industry today overall in terms of global IT and mobile solutions. So that is an important challenge as well, and clearly one where biometrics can help. And finally, that we're actually at a high level of confidence that authentication is secure, reliable, and revocable. And I put revocable in here because I think so many times people think, you see over and over again, oh, biometrics, if I lose my biometrics, I'm done for. I can never replace my fingerprint. And I think we need to really, as an industry, integrate this idea in our thinking and communicate clearly about what biometrics actually are and how revocability can actually be built into the model. Okay, so this notion of identity-centric IT has been rolling around for a long time. And what I think is really interesting about it is if you think about the evolution of authentication and the evolution of what identity-centric means, we have to go back to the initial security model, if you will, for computing, which is we had computers in rooms with locked doors. And that was the security control for access to the computer. And what's happened over time, obviously, is that digital world has expanded and the walls fell down and the network was everywhere. And so what we did was we actually moved towards a secrets-based system, or as my friend Rob Douglas likes to say, a system that was based on approximations of identity. And you can lump passwords, pins, fobs, tokens, SMS, one-time passwords, you name it, it all gets lumped into this bucket. And where we're at right now is a really interesting point in the evolution of identity-centric IT and authentication, which is a movement from a secrets-based system to a biometric system. And so what we do is we move from an approximation of identity to a unique verifiable identity. Again, terminology I stole from my friend Rob Douglas. But what's significant here is not just that we're moving to biometrics, but that biometrics are not based on secrets. And that's something we really need to understand. And I'm going to show you a little model I've developed about how we address that in the biometrics community in just a minute. But first, let's just think about what happens when we move to this model. We move from a secrets-based model to a biometrics-based model. And for a lot of people, what happens is their head explodes because they're terribly afraid that their biometrics are going to be lost and stolen and all of these things. So I think it's really important to make a few points. One is the concerns about biometric data storage and management in the cloud, that being particularly vulnerable to loss, theft, or potential misuse, have really been sensationalized. And they've been sensationalized, I think, to a certain extent by individuals that have particular agendas about the solution they're trying to sell you. And again, for me, it comes back to it's not a on-device versus cloud, it's an on-device and cloud. So in service of trying to say, oh, we have to do biometrics on devices, there's been a lot of sensationalization about biometrics in the cloud. And I just believe, and I think this is based on my understanding of the industry over 15 plus years and the technical experts that I talk to all the time, it's simply not true that on-device biometrics are inherently more secure, protect PII better, and are less privacy invasive. That's an argument that's out there, but I think we really need to look at that carefully. And I think if you really think about what cloud biometrics or server-side biometrics can do, is they really provide a compelling opportunity to simplify authentication, to reduce friction to an appropriate level, and to engage customers and provide a high-quality experience while providing a radically improved authentication insurance method. And so it's all based around this notion of unique verifiable identity. And that requires that you can uniquely verify an individual, not just a device. So coming back to this notion that biometrics are not secrets, the system integrity of a biometric security system is not based on secrets. And this is really important, right? There's four major elements. You can go ahead and just pull these up, Peter. There's four fundamental elements that contribute to biometric solution integrity. And one is that the capture component, which is that you're capturing a live biometric sample from a human being, and you're linking the template that you create from it to a unique verifiable digital identity. Now, in some places, creating a unique verifiable digital identity is easy because you have existing national identity programs or other systems where you've done that. In cases, for example, in the US and the UK and Canada, the complexity here is really the unique verifiable identity. And how do you confirm that? So that's an important piece of the problem, but what's important for biometrics is that you can link the biometrics to that identity. The second thing is that you can come back and compare subsequent samples, biometric samples, to the initial template that you link to that unique verifiable identity, right? Another component is what I call counter, which is applying best practice liveness detection and spoofing countermeasures so that you know that it's a live human being, because capturing the live sample, making sure it's a live human being is what determines the integrity of a biometric system, not the fact that you have that sample itself is a secret. And finally, the other piece is what I call control, which is securely managing the template data, issuance, expiration, revocability, right? And managing the database so that you can recognize if there's been any potential breaches, and you can actually purge the templates if needed and generate new ones. And this is what to me is so interesting about biometrics, is that if you have a series of templates that are based on a specific algorithm and you know that there's a chance the database has been breached, you can just get rid of them and start over again. And so this kind of is counterintuitive when people think about biometrics, because they think, oh, it's my eye, it's my finger, it's my face, I can't ever get a new one, I'm stuck with the one I have. But the template is not the image, right? The template is an algorithmic representation. And over time, we're going to be generating better and better algorithms, and we'll be able to continue to dispose of old templates and generate new ones if needed. So then we have the on-device versus cloud biometrics. And this is not intended to be, oh yes, one is better or one is worse. You can go, again, Peter, go ahead and string through these. The idea here is to understand the differences, and understanding the differences, then understand where it's appropriate to build a solution that is on-device based or a solution that is cloud-based. And some of the places where cloud-based solutions offer unique capabilities is you can create a universal user interface across multiple devices. You can have a unique cross-channel identity. Users don't have to back up their own data. You can't enroll with multiple identities based on multiple devices. And because the unique verifiable identity is not based on a particular token or device, and that you can what I call disaggregate the biometrics from PII. In other words, your biometric data and your other personally identifiable information can exist in different places in cyberspace. And along with this are these biometric data storage best practices. Again, Peter, go ahead and just let these things go. So biometric data needs to be stored as encrypted templates, not image data, right? We're not, and there are folks that are doing things with image data, and to me, that's not really a biometric system. To me, inherently in a biometric system is that you're actually using templates. You shouldn't be able to connect the template to the algorithm that generated or backward engineer the data. Now, this is a bit of an issue with fingerprint data based on fingerprint templates that are based on minutia, because my understanding is that there are ways to get back to the minutia and to potentially generate other templates. But this is something we have to address as an industry. Templates should be revocable. As I said before, you should be able to recall them if you need to be. You should be able to expire them. You should have a life cycle. Maybe a template exists for a few milliseconds. Maybe a template exists for like a credit card for some period of time and then it's expired. So this is something, again, that is connected to the kind of solution you're building. Templates should be stored anonymously, and again, never linked to PII. Disaggregation is a critically important component of this process. In my view, if you have multiple biometrics, iris, face, finger, etc., they shouldn't be co-located in a single database in a single file. Whoops, can you go back just one more, Peter? Thank you. I think we can take it one step further, where you can take template data itself and disaggregate it so that you're actually shredding the data and that it's existing in multiple databases, so that a complex process is required to put it back together, and that you can't extract a template from a single data location. And that finally, again, templates and PII should never be commingled within a single file. I think even co-located on the same database, which is why I think the BISP model, where you have the biometrics located independently, to me is the model we should be looking towards as an industry. And this is just a quick example of one of those models where you're talking about how a biometric identity service provider model could disrupt and actually transform IT, in this case, payments. Right now, we have this huge payment processing infrastructure, and that payment processing infrastructure is about a $2 trillion business a year that is dedicated to mitigating risk. And today, we're using on-device biometrics just to get to the first level of authentication, which is the device authentication. And it's really a glorified PIN or password because it's sitting on top of a PIN or password on your phone. It's just more convenient for the user. And I think what we're going to see is the emergence of biometric identity service providers, where we say, okay, we're going to offload that authentication to a third party. And eventually, to me, that replaces that entire payment processing system, because it's it's unnecessary because the risk, we don't care about the risk of cards anymore because we're not worried about the risk of cards with payments. All we're trying to do is make sure the person who is making the payment has the authorization to make that payment. We don't need to worry about the state of the card. And what that does is it changes the relationship between consumers and the retailers and service providers they're doing business with, and it separates the PII from the biometrics. And in fact, it allows those service providers to actually store less of your PII when they're trying to do business with you. So to me, what I see is a future where biometrics are at the core, where the IT security paradigm evolves from a secrets-based paradigm to a biometric identity-based paradigm. That we think about digital identity as a biometrics first model, and that the notion of identity-centric becomes synonymous with this idea of biometrics at the core. And when I think about it, I think about this biometric identity service provider model, where you have this core unique verifiable identity that is then used by other entities to make sure that their authentication for high-risk, high-value transactions is reliable and secure. And that about wraps it up for today. As I mentioned, there's a white paper that talks about a lot of this in detail. You can download that free at my website. I've got a report on mobile biometrics, which talks about the potential for this marketplace and where it's going over the next 5 years. And please, as always, visit my website, reach out to me. There's a lot of great data that I share freely and hope you will take advantage of. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Peter.
Thank you very much, Max. That was a wonderful overview, and thanks for taking a little longer today because this is again, a very important topic for our industry. Now I'd like to introduce our two other panelists. Joining us today from BioConnect, Rob Douglas, who is the CEO, and from ImageWare, David Harding, Chief Technology Officer and Vice President. I have known both Rob and David for over 10 years. They are truly experts in our industry. Welcome. And the first question to our panel: why is the shift to cloud-based biometrics happening now? Max mentioned a couple of things, but Rob, I'd really appreciate it if you could start us off with this one to get your view on that particular question.
It would be my pleasure, Peter. I think when I listened intently to what Maxine described, and everything from my experience in our industry and the evolution of it makes complete sense to me. My one add I would make is scale. The biggest reason why cloud-based biometrics is going to happen and is happening is for scale. The limitations of on-device-based biometric answers, although there are advantages, they cannot scale. And this is probably the biggest reason I would say for fundamentally why this has to be addressed. And my other comment I'd offer is, although it's new in the world of talking about mobile biometric solutions, it's going to be equally important in biometric wearable-based solutions. And if history repeats itself, which it often seems to, we've already gone through this cycle. So back in the early 2000s, when biometrics really entered onto the stage, they were all on-device based matching. That's how it originally started. And then it moved from that to cloud-based or centralized-based matching solutions. And I can vividly remember being part of that evolution in order to allow scale to occur. So I think the one word scale is probably the one add I could make to the remarks that Maxine raised already.
Thanks, Rob. And David, can I get your take on that, please? Why is this all happening now?
Absolutely. I do agree with Rob. First of all, adoption had to occur in a way that people were comfortable with. And initially, biometrics had such a stigma, especially when it came to things like law enforcement. It was only about 10 years ago you talked to people about using their fingerprint for payment, and people would back off, go, no, I'm not interested. What are you using my fingerprint for? When Apple and Samsung brought the fingerprint to the local device, it was for two reasons. Well, it was primarily for one reason, and it was convenience, not security. That's a key thing. However, by doing so, what they made was a situation where biometrics became acceptable, if not cool. In fact, you can't hardly go into a store these days without seeing people using their Apple Pay or their Google Pay using their fingerprint. Now we've come to a point where it's gone past the cool factor, and we actually need identity authentication, not identity approximation, as Maxine brought up. When you're talking device authentication, which is what match on device is, it's not biometric identity authentication. It's simply device authentication. When you need identity authentication, match on device is not an option. You have to go to cloud. So that's why that's one of the primary reasons I believe we're shifting to cloud.
Well, thank you very much, David. You know, I remember vividly when Apple did make their move to fingerprint, and biometrics moved almost on the day from being creepy to being cool. And it was just remarkable, you know, looking 5 years ago, how much that has affected our industry now. Second question, many cloud-based biometric platforms are multimodal and future-proof by nature. But are there any specific biometric modalities that are especially suited for the on-server paradigm? And David, could you start us off on this one, please?
Thank you. Yes. Well, it used to be that way. In fact, there was when we first started off with biometrics in the industry, it was very hardware oriented, and some were specifically tied to hardware, although that's becoming more rare. The algorithms that we're seeing available, the biometric matching algorithms we're seeing available are available typically on client and on server. So we're seeing algorithms that work on mobile devices, desktops, laptops, but also in the server. So more and more, we're seeing modalities, biometric modalities be available from the server perspective. So you get a lot more capability when you go to server. The difference between these algorithms for server is really how the capture occurs. And that's really the key, being able to get a good friction-free or with minimal friction capture, and then be able to get that to the server securely where they can do that identity authentication. So we're going to continue to see more and more drive of these biometric matching technologies going to the server.
Thank you, David. And Rob, do you have anything you'd like to add to that one?
Yes, I agree with what David just said, and would add that we work in this particular area day in and day out, and we at a very practical level, at a technical level, are dealing with both local matching and server matching of all kinds of different biometric types. And I can't say to you today that there's one particular one. They really are often based on how they've been designed in their initial contemplation, how that particular modality has been established. But we from our perspective, we see local and server match that can be across many modalities, and we can't really at this point, you know, select one and say this one's a better one than another.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to keep moving along here because we're getting a lot of questions in from our attendees, so I'm going to try and keep things moving along. There is some stigma around cloud-based biometrics based on largely exaggerated concerns and persistent technology myths, as Max had alluded to in her presentation. What are the most pressing myths about cloud-based biometrics you still encounter today, and how do you address them with clients, etc.? And Rob, could I ask you to start on this one, please?
Yes, it's all, the most relevant one is around one of privacy. So the myth is that people feel that, you know, once their biometrics have been captured, that means somebody else can make use of them. So that is probably, you know, number 1, 2, and 3. And the interesting thing about that is that actually has been with us for 15 years. So this is not new. This is something that's been around, but the technologies that people have come to this conclusion based on law enforcement use of biometric technologies, where people see in the movies, or they're used to the idea that I'm taking fingerprints, but they're actually rolling their finger across ink and fingerprints are actually being captured. In the commercial applications that we're talking about on biometrics on phones or in wearables or on fixed devices, we're not capturing fingerprints. We're not capturing biometric information. Rather, we're capturing information that's converted to a set of zeros and ones, just like the letter A on your credit card. And that is now that. So, and when that's then encrypted, you now have an encrypted piece of data, not unlike any other piece of data that exists that needs to be secured. So once people actually understand that particular subtlety, and they understand the encryption that exists around, and then the encryption in the network, this particular issue I have experienced has always gone away once people understand how the technology works.
Thanks, Rob. David, what are you finding out there in the market?
Well, I'm finding that the myth is being dispelled, as Rob talked about, very well. So we're not facing this as much as we used to. When I first started talking about this topic at security conferences, that was always the big question. Well, what happens if the database gets hacked versus, say, the device? If they hack the device, they get one fingerprint. If they hack the database in the cloud, they get them all. Well, that's not true. The other thing to keep in mind, and Maxine addressed these very clearly, is the storage of the templates should not be associated with PII. You shouldn't have multiple biometric modalities stored together in a single file, for example. And you should not have templates, and I take it a step further, you should not have templates that are stored at rest in a usable state. They have to be, and Maxine talked about this, being able to, not just obfuscate, but do things with the templates that make them invalid if they were to be extracted. So those are the things that we do. Those are the things that solve the issues. And it also allows for a biometric to be revocable, which is another thing Max talked about and feels very strongly about, as do we. But though, if you do not do those key things, then you do open yourself up to significant risk. If you're storing PII, if you're storing the original biometric captures unobfuscated or in a database with it, those are recipes for disaster. Fortunately, those are not best practices, and those are not the practices that people in the industry are using.
Can I just jump in for 1 second, Peter? So one of the things that I think is really critically important, this goes back to sort of the blockchain, fever, because the limitations of relational databases. I think part of the problem is that the vast majority of solutions that we're using that contain PII they're built on relational databases that were designed to be easily mined. So all of our data is sitting out there built on these systems. And I think what's happening within the biometric sector, which I think is critically important, is we've always been about securing data. And so when David or Rob talk about building these solutions, they're talking about building solutions that are based on design principles that are developed specifically to address security issues. So we're building databases that are designed to be secure. We're not building databases that are designed to be mined.
Thank you, Max. It's very interesting. We're getting a lot of questions in from the attendees, and I'm going to move off script here a little bit and actually get to some of these now, because it's exactly what we're talking about right now. And David, you talked about the irrevocability issue. We're getting a number of questions. Can you give us a detailed example of how this actually works? I think there's still, in the industry, we understand it, but obviously our attendees would like a little bit more information around that. Can you walk through an actual example of how this would work? So let's say, a fingerprint, and the thing we hear in the mainstream press all the time is, once your fingerprint is been hacked or breached, you can never again use your fingerprint. Max dealt with this, but I think we're getting asked for a little bit more information around this. Can you elaborate, please, David?
Sure, I'll actually give a bit of a longer-winded answer to that, because I'll give you the example of what not to do. The Office of Personnel Management for our federal government here in the United States, their database was breached. Mm-hmm. They got all sorts of PII, and I'm talking background check PII, so I'm talking deep data on the individuals in that database. And for millions of people in that database, they stored raw fingerprint images, raw fingerprint captures. So the director of the FBI at that time, all 10 of his fingerprints are in the wild. So he has the problem you just described. His fingerprints are not revocable. That's not how biometric solutions work. That was just a database, as Maxine talks about, where the data could be retrieved easily and manipulated easily. Well, it was manipulated easily by bad actors. In a biometric matching solution, you are not storing the raw fingerprints. Those fingerprints are converted into templates, which is matching data. And every modality does this, and they each have the features and minutia that they use to uniquely identify a person. But this is raw binary data. That's the starting point. To go further, You do not associate that raw binary data with any personally identifiable information, PII, the user's name, their personal characteristics, their birth date, their social security number. That is flat out. And then you take that template data and you be very specific with how you store it and where you store it. So, for example, we at ImageWare, we use a proprietary, highly patented, real-time biometric database that obfuscates. And the templates, when they're stored, are not usable. They can only be used at the time of match. So when Maxine, during her report, was talking about having something that can only be used for perhaps even milliseconds, that's exactly correct. You have to be able to have a template that, even if it got compromised, is useless. And when you have that, then you have a biometric that is in fact revocable.
Thank you very much. This is going to be one we're going to have to continue to address, because I know this will crop up again, but thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on to the next question. Does cloud-based biometrics have a killer app? In which area of application do you expect to see the first big spike in cloud-based adoption? Rob, could you please start us off on this one, please?
Yes, I can see several. One is already underway, which is in the world of payments. So anything to do with digital identity and authentication for the movement of any payment, that one is already underway, and it's happening at the consumer level. The second one that we see on the horizon actually fits all to do with access. In fact, if you've seen any of the online or the advertisements coming from Amazon about Amazon Key, it's the redefinition of how we think about access control and the need for identity and the free movement of identity in cloud-based infrastructures to get in and out of things that we humans need to interact with would be a second one. The third one is the sharing economy. So if you are in the sharing economy where there are multiple identities who are sharing a particular service or a room or a vehicle, the sharing economy, I think, is going to be one that is going to have great need for cloud-based biometric identity-based solutions. And then the last one I'd offer is, this one's early, but there's a lot of activity going on in this area, is IoT. How does identity intersect IoT? And I think there will be many use cases that will come forward where these two, where this application will involve cloud-based biometrics.
Well, thanks, Rob. Well, we certainly saw your first example at the Money 2020 show last month in Vegas. In terms of killer apps, the payment area is the fastest moving one out there right now in the marketplace. So, Max, can I get your take on this one as well, please?
Boy, I tend to stay away from killer apps. And it's funny, I listened to what Rob said. I'm like shaking my head going, yeah, uh-huh. I guess I'm not so much a believer in killer apps as much as I am in a believer of transformative and disruptive technology. And so I think that really when I think about biometrics, what I think about is this transformation, this disruption of these systems, the infrastructures that underlie identity across the board. And I actually really like the whole sharing economy concept too. I think that's going to be huge. It's funny because people are talking about automobiles a lot, and I think there's obviously opportunity for biometrics within the vehicle marketplace. But I think more broadly, the sharing economy is huge because it underlies this notion that we are not linked to a specific device or a specific room or a specific instance of anything, that what is going to travel with us is our biometrically verified digital identity. And that should be, again, at the core of how we are interacting in the world, and regardless of what particular device or location or transaction we're trying to engage in, that's fundamentally going to be the way that we identify ourselves. So I think about it more as sort of the fundamental infrastructure that is going to enable a whole myriad of applications and solutions.
Thanks, Max. And David, I'd appreciate your take on this one as well. Maybe killer app is one way of looking at it, but maybe vertical industry could be another. What's your take on this?
Well, you know, I agree with both. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but I'm going to come to the key word you used in your question, which is a big spike when you talk about adoption. When you talk about fintech, you talk about healthcare, you talk about these vertical markets. Those are opt-in opportunities. Very rarely are you forced to use the technology. It's opt-in. I like enterprise. Enterprise is the I don't even like to call it a vertical because it's really more of a horizontal and crosses all of those things. When you look at enterprise, enterprise is feeling the most pain. The massive data breaches we've seen lately, where hundreds of millions of identities have been stolen, have not been because a biometric, they hacked 100 million phones. They hacked the network. So being able to biometrically secure the enterprise, biometrically secure your network infrastructure, not only for your employees, but every single stakeholder, whether that be a contractor, whether that be a vendor, a supplier, your customer. That is the enterprise model. And the difference between, say, enterprise and, say, fintech or healthcare is the latter are opt-ins. Enterprise, which now 82% of the data breaches that occur inside the enterprise, according to this year's Verizon data breach report, are due to a compromised or easy to guess password, a secret base. By going through and securing the enterprise, that's not an opt-in, that's a required. So you're going to see much more mass adoption of cloud-based biometrics and true identity authentication, I believe, in the enterprise sector.
Thank you very much. And the last question, then I'm going to move to more from the attendees. Cloud-based biometrics, by definition, require network connectivity for authentication to occur. With the advent of 5G, and this is coming fast and it's big, it'll be used at the Olympics in the winter this year. Do you expect to see more collaboration between biometric vendors and telecoms? Are there any infrastructure challenges in the cloud-based space that need to be addressed? And this is also very topical with the Mobile World Congress coming up, which is in essence a telecom show. So you know, biometrics are playing a much greater role there. And Rob, can I ask you to deal with this one for us, please?
Yes, so obviously every time we can expand the pipe of data communication, that's going to open up new use cases or new opportunities for applications. Biometrics on their own, the actual templates themselves, generally are not big data consumers. So certainly, would we be in a position, I'm going to go to an extreme, where I've got the country of India that has 1 billion biometric users enrolled, and in a 5G network, could I now do server-based matching of all 1 billion citizens? Well, certainly the wider the pipe, the more likely that that's possible. So I think certainly the widening the pipe will open up the scale and size of being able to get to hundreds of millions of server-matched identity templates. So I think that that's very possible. And my own experience is that over the last probably 3 years, we have noticed the level of collaborations that we have with the telecommunication community has gone up materially. So that would give me some indication that there is a connection here over the medium term.
Thank you very much, Rob. And David, could I get your take, please?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the advent of faster, better, cheaper technology is only going to improve what we can do with biometrics. I mean, biometrics work very well with mobile today. We're able to deal with, all sorts of different types of capture using mobile device, capture good data. It's going to get better the bigger the pipe and the more tightly integrated and the more sensors we have on mobile devices. So it's going to be exciting. We'll see you at Mobile World Congress, of course. It's going to be exciting to see what technologies are coming down the pipe, that those that we know about and those that are going to be a bit of a surprise. So we're excited to see what's coming in the very near future.
Peter, can I just comment here?
Yes,
think
please.
One of the places where I think it's interesting is, I mean, the short answer to the question is yes. And one of the places where I think it might be really interesting is in terms of behavioral biometrics and doing risk assessments. Because I think the bigger the pipe, the more data that can be used for a more comprehensive risk assessment that can incorporate various modalities of biometrics and enable more complex step-up kind of authentication. So that's where I kind of see an opportunity in that respect.
Terrific. We're getting a number of questions about some of the privacy and legislation that exists in Europe and elsewhere, and you know, as our industry is moving ahead quite rapidly, where do some of these conversations, especially with regard to what's going on in Europe, come into play? Anybody want to take that one?
I'll start that one. If you look at the legislation that's gone on in Europe, for example, where biometrics is stored becomes a very big issue. If it's cloud, they still want it within the confines of their geolocation. The same is true in Canada, for example. So where the biometrics are held is very important. The ability to be forgotten is something that people have talked a lot about in Europe, and they've actually passed laws and had lawsuits with the concept of being able to be forgotten. So this comes back to the idea of being able to revoke biometric data. So as you look at solutions that support biometric matching, especially if you're looking throughout Europe or in parts of North America, those are things that you definitely have to take into account.
Thank you very much. Anybody else have a comment in this area?
No, I think David said it well from my perspective.
Okay, getting more questions about storage and again, the irrevocability thing seems to still come up, but I'm going to ask a quick one. How will AI affect biometrics, and could AI actually be a replacement for biometrics? How will those two play together?
Well, artificial intelligence is a great field. I happened to start my career in it. Artificial intelligence, like many things, is really not about deterministic results, but actually probabilistic results. So AI is a perfect example to do things like Maxine talked about, to be able to do risk assessment. But when you talk about matching a biometric, perhaps you could use things like risk assessment with the results. Did this fingerprint match enough that we can be assured that this identity is in fact authenticated? If not, can we move to another? Do we know about the situation that they're in? Can we apply a biometric based on that situation? So AI really comes into the risk assessment. There are certain AI techniques that are used in certain biometric algorithms that I've seen. But really, I see more risk assessment as a very, very good application in conjunction with biometric authentication.
And I would add the same comment. We actually see them as they're interconnected. It's not an either or. And you know, it wasn't long ago where we all looked at the answer to authentication of biometrics was to get one biometric to authenticate, yes, this is this person or not. And I think we're so far past that now. There's so many different biometric types that can be consumed, modalities within a mobile device. Just imagine a couple of years from now, when biometric wearables are just very common for us, we can be pulling sensor information out of multiple sources to be able to build a mosaic of the likelihood that it's Rob, and then using AI techniques as a way to make a risk score or risk assessment of the likelihood of that's my identity.
Thank you very much. And Max, do you have the final word here?
Well, I agree with all of this. I think the marriage of AI and biometrics really provide the kind of risk assessment tools that we need, that we desperately need to combat the level of financial fraud and identity fraud that is rampant today. So to me, it's a powerful combination and really going to be take biometric capabilities to a whole nother level.
Well, thank you all very much. I really appreciate all of the questions and answers. And I want to thank again our sponsors, BioConnect and ImageWare, for their continuous support, and especially to Maxine Most from Acuity for her updates today. Have a safe and happy holiday season, and join us next year on January 24th for our Year in Review webinar. And don't forget to go to FindBiometrics.com and take 4 minutes to complete that survey. Happy holidays to all. Thank you and good night.
Goodbye.